In the consultation that you had this morning together and reported, it was evident that you are very insightful about the fundamental challenges faced by marriages in contemporary world. And my hope is that in the course of this afternoon, some of the issues that you raised would be addressed and adequately covered. A question was asked this morning about the use of counselors, which I think is essential for you not to avoid. And the issue is not whether if you are a family or a marriage is going through process of change, should or should not counsel someone. Of course you should. The question is how to choose the right counselor. Many years ago, there was a film made, or a short film, of different schools of psychiatry and psychotherapy. And they chose the most prominent individual representing each school and asked them separately, they didn't know each other at all, asked them separately to summarize and demonstrate through an interview what is unique about their school of thought. Some were Freudian, some were Jungian, some were behavior therapists, different schools, which were at odds with each other completely, Adlerians and so forth. And what emerged was fascinating. What emerged was all of these individuals who they had interviewed were older, more knowledgeable, more experienced, more wise of members of those disciplines. And they found that all of them emphasized the same things. And they did the same thing, in spite of calling themselves different names. They were all compassionate people. They were all understanding people. They were all people who had experiences in life and faced challenges in life and have been able to deal with them. They have learned the lessons of life. And when they establish relationship with the other person, was on the basis of that accumulated insight and wisdom and sensitivity that comes through life, experience of life, combined with reflection, thought, and knowledge. And therefore, if you are seeking help, choose someone who has some of these, or hopefully all of these characteristics. And you usually will find them in older individuals, in more experienced individuals, usually in women, but not necessarily. And don't be afraid of changing counselors. Counselors are there to be changed. Okay, so if they are in business of helping you to change, you have every right to change them. So change them if necessary. Don't worry about it. You go, if it doesn't work, don't get stuck there, nor feel apologetic. Simply, not all personalities connect, and not all individuals are sensitive to all various kinds of challenges that we see in life. So keep that in mind because it's very essential. You see, the challenge of modern psychological schools is that psychological counseling started, and psychotherapy started with the notion of working on the psyche. Psyche is the soul. Psyche is the word, Greek word, for the soul. The idea was, how can we help troubled souls? Okay, that was the idea. But because materialism during the 20th century was on ascendancy, and it took over the field completely, the whole notion of psychiatry and psychology, from study and healing of the soul, moved to the area of study and correction of the mind, which later was moved to the study and correction of the brain. Hence, the prevalence of all kinds of medications for any kind of challenge that people feel. This is the challenge of modern psychological schools and psychiatric schools of thought. It's a materialistic school. But eventually, I think a discipline would evolve, and in this audience there are a number of people who are physicians and counselors and in a health profession. I hope they do it, is that eventually we have to create a condition in which psychological and spiritual principles are both integrated. Because neither, without the help of the other, neither of them alone is sufficient to deal with these challenges. So these are just preliminary thoughts about it. Questions were asked about how transition from one level to the next level could happen, and how we can transform our worldviews and from authoritarian and identity-based to unity-based. And I think the main issue to take in consideration here is to focus on the needs, human needs and human rights for a moment. We talk a little bit about what are the fundamental human needs and what are the fundamental human rights. There is a quotation here that I want you to, to reflect on. Abdul Baha was asked, what is the attitude of your belief toward the family? This was when he was in the United States in 1911, 12, that era. Answer. According to teachings of Baha'u'llah, the family being a human unit, must be educated according to the rules of sanctity. Now he describes what that means. All the virtues must be taught the family. The integrity of the family bond must be constantly considered. Integrity of the family bond. This is the issue of unity. the integrity of the family bond must be constantly considered, and the rights of the individual members must not be transgressed. Now, this is amazing that Abdu'l-Baha is talking about human rights when even the concept was not yet generally promulgated in societies anywhere in the world. And he began to talk about the rights. And he said, the rights of the son, the father, the mother, none of them must be transgressed. None of them must be arbitrary. Just as the son has certain obligations to his father, the father likewise has certain obligations to his son. The mother, the sister, and other members of the household have their certain prerogatives. All these rights and prerogatives must be conserved. Yet the unity of the family must be sustained. You see how he juxtaposes between rights and unity. Because in the contemporary society, the issue of rights often is the cause of disunity. Often, almost always, is the cause of disunity. Abdu'l-Baha then said, look, we have to give up the authoritarian modes of relationship, because in the authoritarian modes of relationship, nobody but the father has the right. So when he said the father has the right, the son has the right, the daughter has the right, the wife has the right, everybody has the right, he was crumbling the foundations of the authoritarian approach in the family. And he said, while we have these rights, we have to make sure that they do not cause disunity in the family. And then says the injury of one shall be considered to the injury of all, the comfort of each, the comfort of all, the honor of one, the honor of all, which is, again, further elaboration of different dimensions of unity. So, this being the case, in the family, husband and wife and parents and children have to be aware of what are the fundamental rights of each person and how these rights can be safeguarded and protected. Now, there is a tremendous confusion about the notion of human rights in our society. And what I'm going to share with you is a personal formulation of the concept of human rights. So please take it as such. It seems to me that the fundamental human rights correspond with fundamental human needs. We as human beings have certain fundamental needs. And those needs, we have the right to fulfill them. Okay? So what are those fundamental needs? Well, I hadn't thought about human rights and human needs until when I was on a trip to Russia, to St. Petersburg. At that time, it was Leningrad. Nancy was there at that time. We were at a conference there. And it was arranged for me to go to visit the Karl Marx Institute of Psychiatry. And it was a very interesting experience I don't go into all the other details of what happened. But one of the things that happened when we were sitting together and we had a discussion of about 3 hours with the head of the institute and a number of other psychiatrists and psychologists, very small number. The head of the institute turned to me and said, "What are the fundamental human rights?" And I hadn't thought about human rights until then. So I scratched my head and said, okay, this is, challenging questions. Anytime a challenging questions come to you, you should find some time to collect your thoughts, to turn to the higher levels, ask for inspiration. The best way is drinking. You just take your cup, slowly. It works. At least that worked twice for me. So as I was doing that, we were drinking tea there. Some thoughts came to my mind about human rights. And since then, I have elaborated on them. I have been very touched by poverty of the people, by the poverty of people in Russia at that time, and difficult circumstances they were living, and the lines of bread and everything that were there. So I said, it seems to me that there are 3 fundamental rights. And 3 came out of his blue, okay? I said, the first obvious rights that we have are survival rights. We as human beings, we have survival needs and survival rights. Survival needs are the need for food, for shelter, for medical attention, for a relatively secure environment. These are elements of survival that everybody needs. And because everybody has to survive, everybody has to have the right that their survival needs are met. And a society should be organized in such a way that people's survival needs are met. And as I said that, all of the people there said, well, our society hasn't been able to fulfill that yet, because the whole population was struggling for survival. And in our world today, if you look around it, you will see majority of people are preoccupied with issues of bread and money and food and shelter and clothing and medical assistance. Practically the whole world still is preoccupied with survival needs. And we live in a world that millions of people die because they're hungry, because they have very simple preventable diseases, but they don't have any medication, and on, because they live in the wars of zones of war and so forth. The second category of human needs are what I call association needs. Association needs refer to human need for relationships, human need to belong. We all need to belong to families, to communities, to societies, to nations, to religious groups, to various combinations of people. And is it in the context of the association needs that such issues as freedom, as justice, as equality emerge. We all should be free from impact of prejudice on us. we all should have that freedom to live in a society which we are not subject to prejudice, to segregation. We all need to live in an environment and society which is fair and just and function according to the just rule of law. We all need to be treated equally in the context of society. And when I describe that, people say, what else is left? What other needs we have? If we have our survival needs met and our association needs, the way I described it, met, what else we need? And I said, well, the third need is going to be the most difficult for you because they are called spiritual needs or transcendent needs. And by this I mean that it's not enough for human beings to have their survival needs met and to live in a free and safe and equitable society. Now we have to be able to have freedom to give meaning and purpose to our freedom, to bring meaning and purpose to our survival. We have to have the opportunity to transcend the limitations of survival and freedom and association. Transcend meaning that we now have them and now we have to use them for a higher purpose, for a higher objective. If we don't do that, then we create an extremely rich society, materially rich, which becomes spiritually very poverty-stricken. And I said, this is the situation that we have in this world. We live in a world that increasingly is more wealthy in terms of material issues and more poverty-stricken in terms of moral, ethical, spiritual issues. And it's very interesting that now we see what are the consequences of immorality and lack of ethics in economic affairs. Look what has happened in the world today. And look, all of them are because of unethical practices on the part of those who were in control. And then it gives us an idea of what Baha'u'llah was talking about a spiritual solution to economic problem of humanity. So we human beings have these three categories of needs: survival, association, and spiritual or transcendent needs. And our human rights are those three. In the context of the family, the survival needs are very fundamental. First of all, children would not survive unless the parents took care of them. Okay, that's one essential. But the family also, in order for the family to survive, for the marriage to survive, there has to be enough material means so that the family is not homeless and in a state of begging and conditions that are not conducive to creating a marriage or a family which is healthy and progressive. And therefore, it is essential that the members of the family, especially parents, they begin to discipline themselves educate themselves, develop necessary capacities so that they can have a livelihood, they can have an income, they can have at least a modest life. That's essential. And in this respect to the issue of wealth, wealth is a very interesting phenomenon. Wealth, in some sense, is like power. Doesn't matter how much the people have, they still think they should have more. And this is amazing, the same as power. That's the reason that dictators, doesn't matter how much power they have to have more power. And the reason, of course, in terms of, with respect to power is that we human beings are fundamentally powerless. We know we are powerless. Doesn't matter how much power we have, doesn't matter how big of an army we have, we are powerless people. Ultimately, we are going to die. And we know we are going to die. And we know that we don't have any control over it. And we know that we are weak in the face of demands of physical living. We have to sleep, we get hungry, we get cold. Doesn't matter how great we are, all of this happens to us. And therefore, we know deep down that we are not powerful. So those who are focused on power, the authoritarians, doesn't matter how much power they have, they still feel insecure. And that's the reason that they use their power in destructive means and accumulate more and more and more. Now, wealth also has a similar notion. Baha'u'llah says most of the wealth that people accumulate, they accumulated through means and ways that have not been justified. And he said that is one reason that the law of right of God has been brought in order to purify the money that people collect, that most of the time, or many, are not really what they deserve to collect. This is particularly true about the rich members of society. The richer people are, the easier they collect money. And the more money they collect, and because they know how easily has come by, the more insecure they feel, because they know easily it can go away, as it did during these recent crises. So they become more and more insecure, and they collect more and more and more. That's the reason that dictators put billions of dollars in banks in Switzerland while in their power. What are you going to do with billion? What are you going to do it? You know, like people who make houses that have 8 bedrooms. How many beds at night you are going to sleep in? No, really. Wouldn't it be awful to move from one bed and after an hour go to the other bed and another? Why you need 8 bedrooms? And there are 2 of you living and you have 8 bedrooms. And you go to their home and they give you a tour of the home, and and these, you see some furniture that plastic on it still is there. It doesn't be moved because nobody ever has sat on it, What is this for, And we don't understand the notion of wealth, and we become so preoccupied. And so many families become preoccupied with this process of accumulation of wealth that they forget the other fundamental needs of their children, because you cannot meet your needs of your children through wealth. What children need fundamentally is something else, not wealth. One more issue about wealth. In one of his writings, Baha'u'llah says, that the wealth of this world is like the sands in the desert. The winds of the will of God just moves on. And the sands move from here to there to there. Today, in your neighborhood, you have a huge heap of sand, which is called money in the structure of economy of today. And tomorrow, they're all gone. The market goes up and down, and the sand goes here and there and there. It's just amazing what happens. Okay. So what do children need? Children need a safe, comfortable home. Of course. They need food. They need shelter. But what happens if you overfeed your children? You make them sick. Okay? And what happens if you imprison your children in a home and don't let them go out? So shelter and food and all of these things all have to be according to the principles of maturity, which is moderation. Baha'u'llah says moderation is the sign of maturity. Moderation is the sign of maturity. And when we are immoderate, both on the side of having things and on the side of not having things, we are bringing discomfort, unnecessary discomfort, to ourselves and to our families. Now, few words about education of children. There is ample evidence in psychological literature that children who don't receive adequate love, they become self-destructive and other destructive. There is research after research after research has shown that children who do not receive enough love from their families, they become prone to violence. And this issue is becoming more evident as we see what is happening to our children in the Western world that we are very familiar with. The reason that the schools are becoming more violent, the reason that the rate of bullying is going up, the reason that the mass murders every day are reported everywhere, the reasons that we see so much crime and drug addictions and all of those. One of the fundamental reasons for all of these is that our children are receiving inadequate parenting. Parents love their children in a number of ways, in a healthy manner. First, we make sure that their survival needs are met. Second, we have to make sure that they develop self-knowledge. Children have to develop self-love, self-knowledge, and self-confidence. Now, in order to develop self-love, children have to have freedom within protected boundaries. The authoritarian families do not allow children to have freedom. They demand conformity from their children. The identity-based families, individualistic, adversarial families of modern time, they do not provide a framework for the children and let children to be in a chaotic state. They don't have any control. Neither of these two conditions, overprotected, confining, authoritarian family, or totally loose, undisciplined, the so-called modern free families, neither of them help the children to develop the necessary self-knowledge and self-love and self-capacity. Because children need to experiment in order to learn. But experimentation, by its very nature, is a disciplined, guided activity. So experimentation is a combination of guidance and freedom. It's a combination of bringing together and the authority of the parent in the form of guidance and the freedom given to the child to make mistakes, to experiment, and to learn from mistakes. And we have to balance these two together. And most family finds it very difficult to do so. They go one or the other way, and they find it difficult to bring the two together. So this combination is necessary. Now, experimentation is a fearful process, especially when you don't know what to do, and children don't, and they want to learn something. They need courage. They need courage to experiment within the boundaries that are established for them, to learn both the joy of success and lessons of failure. We need to do that. And one of the ways that you can help the children to develop this capacity is to encourage them. Encouragement means to give someone courage, right? That's what the word encouragement means, to give people courage. And you can only give people courage if you focus on the positive qualities that they have. Children, all of them have certain positive qualities. And by focusing on the positive qualities of the child, you help the child to have courage to experiment and make mistakes and learn from it. And through this process, you focus on, instead of disciplining the child, to teach the child to discipline himself or herself. Because ultimately, you want to help children to develop inner discipline, self-discipline. The two types of families that we talked about, the authoritarian and the adversarial types of families. The authoritarian families put enormous external discipline on the children. So these children behave very well at home. But as soon as they are a little bit bigger and they have a little bit freedom, they begin to break every law that their parents have imposed on them. They fail at the school, they go and steal something, they do everything to make the father and mother ashamed, and the father and mother, they say, but my angel, he's totally good at home. And the teacher says, but here at school, he is really not an angel. And it goes back and forth because the child now knows that he has certain powers. And the power that he has is just simply to prove to the parents that they are not all powerful. So many, many times in the authoritarian families, children go the route of either conformity and become exactly like their parents. They don't evolve, they don't grow, they don't adapt to change, and they repeat the same force-based, power-based behavior. Or they go exactly the opposite way, and they do exactly the opposite of what their parents wanted. And for many Baha'i families, they shouldn't be surprised if your children decide to leave and not to be Baha'is and this and that, because they just simply have to establish their own identity. What you like to do as parents is to help your children, to give your children enough freedom so that in the context of the family relationship, they gradually develop that level of self-confidence and self-love and self-understanding that they don't need to go in a contrary direction or to become totally submissive in order to survive. So this balance is very fundamental, and the parents, many of you have questions about how to discipline and so forth. It's all related on how we help the children to develop inner discipline. Another thing related to issue of self-knowledge is that we have to teach the children about what is conducive to their exaltation as a human being and to their debasement as human being. Baha'u'llah, in one of his quotations that is about the wealth, he says, wealth is acceptable, I'm paraphrasing, provided that there is maturity. For a mature human being, wealth is acceptable. And then he goes on to say, in essence, describes maturity is that condition that we learn about what conditions in life help human beings to exalt their stations, to safeguard the nobility of their being, and what are the conditions that result in the other direction, the opposite direction. And we have to teach our children to learn that there are certain type of behavior and certain activities that helps them to evolve and to be noble, fantastic, marvelous individuals. And there are other types of behavior that results in exactly the opposite. So they become knowledgeable about the dynamics of life rather than being preoccupied about what my mother wants, my father wants, how should I obey, shouldn't I obey, and this battle of wills happening between parents and children. The battle of wills is one of the most difficult challenges of parenthood, because children have very, very strong wills. And when children's will comes against your will, I promise you, always they will win. Children always win in the battle of wills. So to the extent possible, do not fall into that trap. Okay? And you have, of course, the techniques of how to do it depends on the specific conditions of each child and family and dynamics and so forth. But I'm sure you can figure it out. But do not allow yourself to fall in the trap of battle of wills with the children. They are already won. As soon as you are in the battle, they have won. Okay? So these are some of the issues that are related about the needs, so fundamental needs of children with respect to issue of discipline is that they have to have a very clear framework for conduct. And within that very clear framework for conduct, they should have freedom to experiment. Okay? And then also they have to be very clear about what are the consequences of violating the boundaries that are established. And then you have to make sure that the boundaries that you establish are reasonable, or logical, or appropriate to the age of the child, and is not conducive to a state of either authoritarian form of behavior on your part or chaotic indifference type of response on your part. Those both are necessary. But that clear framework is essential. And in this regard, you have to remember that children, especially young people, youngsters, they aspire to be great. Okay? They aspire to be great. And therefore, you should not hesitate to give them great challenges. And also make them involved in challenges of life that you as parents are experiencing. Don't safeguard your children from challenges that you're facing, whether they're economic or otherwise. Engage them to the degree that is appropriate in that process, because it helps them to face the realities of life and deal with the realities of life. Now, I've noticed many times parents complain about their young adolescent children. They say, you should look at his room. Or they say, he never does his duties. And you say, what are his duties? Well, take the garbage out. Well, cleaning your room and collecting garbage doesn't really give you much positive sense of self. It doesn't help you to establish your identity. And if the child says, can I participate in some major activity? Can I go to a Baha'i youth conference on my own? And the parent says, but you even don't take your garbage out. How can I trust you to go to that event? When you do that, when you make big activities conditional upon little activities, invariably it fails. Do it the other way. You say, of course you can go to Baha'i conference for the young people that are there. There are certain expectations that we have. You give the expectations. You make sure that there is a supervision and so forth. And you would be surprised, the room is clean and the garbage is taken out. Because when you give a higher level of respect to a person that is evolving and is growing and trying to establish his or her sense of identity, then they automatically do the other things. It's just simply because it becomes unimportant now. Now you're a great person, and a great person, of course you take the garbage out. Who cares? Because taking garbage out doesn't become synonymous with your level of maturation. You establish level of maturation at a higher level and reasonable level. And then the lesser things automatically become part of the behavior of a mature person. Because they see their father is taking it out, or mother is taking it out. It's okay, my father and mother are mature individuals and take the garbage out without complaining. And they, make up their bed, hopefully. And therefore I do it also. You see, they begin to see, you see. So it is a process of helping your young people to develop positive sense of identity through focusing on great objectives. Okay? The Guardian, in one of his letters to one of the youth, says that you have to think very great ideas. He's again paraphrasing. And then he says, you have to think of saints, of heroes, of martyrs, of administrators. You have to think that in the future you will become one among those, because these are the kind of people that the world of humanity needs. The world of humanity needs saints. The world of humanity needs martyrs. The world of humanity needs people who serve humanity at the highest level. And you should focus your attention on that. This is your goal. This is what you are aspiring to. And by doing that, you raise the level of self-expectation on the part of these young people. And in doing so, when the level of self-expectation goes up, then you will be surprised how much of the ordinary little problems that are here and there disappear. You will be surprised how they disappear. So these are some thoughts about the issues that you raised earlier in questions that you had and comments that you made.
Of these greater tasks that we can assign to our children?
Well, one example that I gave was that you should share some of the challenges that the family is facing with respect to job or with respect to buying a house or things of that nature. It's important to engage children in the discussion about those issues. Because first of all, they see that these are aspects of life, that the houses don't come by accident, and that jobs require protection, and we have to, sometimes you lose them, and this and that money doesn't grow on the tree. The children have to know these things. And it's not enough to tell them that money doesn't grow on tree, because as far as they are concerned, it grows on the tree. You write the check, and it comes, very easy. You put this little plastic, and money comes out. So as far as they are concerned, it does. So they did a research a number of years ago, comparing Chinese families in Hawaii with non-Chinese families in Hawaii, wanted to see why the Chinese family children had far less difficulties, both in the family and school and community, than the others. And the only thing that they found that was very prominent was that they found that this Chinese family shared many of their family issues with the children and talked about it, and they knew about it, and they knew about business, and they knew about challenges of business, and they were more in a real world rather than make-believe world, okay? And this is related to the statement of Abdul Baha that we have to help, make our children to face difficulties. We shouldn't make life easy for them, okay? That doesn't mean that you're mean and, controlling and this. It means that you engage children in realities. For example, if somebody is sick, children should know. Is a grandfather or a grandmother or somebody is dying, children should know. Children should go and visit. Children should face the reality of death. That's fundamental for them. The worst thing is to protect them from these realities. So these are some examples. There are many. I'm just not coming to my mind right now.
My question is about the school of the conditional education for the discipline. Recently, some families are not permissive or not authoritarian, but everything that the child wants, they say, if you do that, we would give that. For example, I want to go to the summer to the camp. If you grade A with this course, we would go. Everything the child wants is conditioned. If you do that, what's your opinion about this?
Well, it works to a certain degree, but not fully. Children have to develop love of learning. And love of learning cannot be created through just process of reward and punishment for learning. Eventually, you want to create a situation that to learn is a reward by itself. To do good is the reward by itself, okay? Not that to do good and then you get candy or you get clothes or you get this or you get that. So you have to be very careful not to go overboard in this method, which is very, one of the main schools of psychology, but nevertheless, it has drawbacks. At the moderate level is okay, but when it goes to extreme and when it goes on an ongoing basis, no. For a short period of time, helping the child to learn how exciting it is to learn, then that's fine. Once it reaches a point, then you don't need to continue that process. The child then hopefully would do it, and you encourage them to do it, and so forth. Any other question, comments?
I think that maybe you haven't been saying it, but I've been thinking in context of one child. But when we have several or even a few children, how we change and adapt and can think about it in that context.
What do you mean?
Well, as far as discipline and not comparing the children, not perverting one by praising the other.
You never do that. Yeah, it is so essential that children not to be compared. Each child is a unique individual human being. And each child has a unique context in which it is born and it is raised. The parents are not the same, the conditions are not the same for the first child and the second child and third child. and it is essential that we don't compare them. One of the important issues about children, because children would invariably compare each other and themselves with each other, invariably they do, is to help children to discover some unique issues about themselves, unique capacities and unique abilities and unique areas of interest. Also, as parents, you have to make sure that you give separate, independent time for each child that belongs to them. The child has a special time with the parent, with the mother, with father, with others, so they don't feel that they are replaced by the other child, and they are not cheated either. Children have a profound sense of justice. Anytime that you deal with them a little bit unfair, they would immediately tell you, this is not fair. And because the sense of justice is an innate sense in human beings. And I think you are going to do all right. I think that the parents of these generations now have the most difficult time than parents in the past and the parents in some distant future. We live at a time when the sense of community has disappeared. And therefore, we are all alone. And when we are alone, young people having to work, having to make money, having to raise children in a world that is totally indifferent to us, and constantly giving different messages to our children than should we want them to hear, it is the most difficult time. And every time I look at my grandchildren, I just feel deeply sad, worried about my children, of how they are going to help these little children to grow in this very difficult world. So everything that you say, my heart goes to you because I know how difficult it is. We live in very difficult times. When communities were more intact and people lived in the context of extended families, the value of extended family was that the children would learn not only from the parents, but from a wide range of other trusted members of the extended family. And the tensions that would happen between parents and children would be also dissipated, because they are angry and they go to grandmother or go to grandfather or aunt or uncle or a good friend or good neighbor, and the dynamics would be much easier handled. But that kind of extended family, for whatever good or bad it was, it has disappeared or is disappearing. Now, the future, from a perspective of Baha'i community, is to create communities of people. Communities of people in which there are activities and there are programs that engages the young people in such way of life that is very positive and take away some of those difficulties that you have. I give you an example. When I became a Baha'i, was around age 14 and a half or so, I immediately was in a Baha'i community that had about 300 youth, a little bit younger and a little bit older than me. These young people were extremely well organized under guidance of the spiritual assembly. We had weekly classes, several classes to learn about different things. We had classes on how to make talks, how to give talks. We had classes about different writings of the faith. Every morning, we had classes at 7 o'clock in the morning. I used to go to Baha'i classes every morning at 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock. I did that until I graduated from medical school. Every morning and every evening from 7 to 8, I would go to a Baha'i class, except for 1 day a week. Okay? This discipline was different. The expectations were different. The idea of getting up in the morning and say your long obligatory prayer while at the hour of dawn was the most exciting thing that you would do. And then you go to the class and talk with your friends and talk about what was happening and so forth. This was the life that I lived. That life even was less like that when my younger siblings were growing up. At that time, the Baha'i community in Iran was dramatically changing. And changing not necessarily for a more cohesive community. It was actually for less cohesive community, unfortunately. Okay? And it became less and less cohesive until the crisis of 30 years ago happened. And again, the Baha'i community became more cohesive. And I have a feeling that it has the same dynamics now than it did before. Okay? So I see in the future, we are going to create communities of people in which examples are set for the children, for their form of behavior, for the time of sleep, for the kind of activities they do, and so forth, that we don't have it right now, okay? But I definitely see these are the patterns of a future Baha'i communities. In the meanwhile, do your best. Really, I'm serious. In the meanwhile, we do our best. We keep that in mind. If you can create a group of friends with your children that you are trustworthy, and you can give them, help them to establish along with you certain patterns of behavior, these are very important. But on a spiritual terms, I think nothing would be more helpful for the children to be prepared for age 15. We did in our family with our children, and my parents did with their children. I remember that the whole idea of becoming 15 became such a profound expectation on the part of our children. And they were preparing themselves for the age of 15 when no longer would be responsible only to their parents, but to God. And I said to my children, I said, from then on, it is between you and God. But we had to prepare them from younger age. We had to, encourage them to learn obligatory prayers, to say them regularly, to start fasting at the age of, our sons start fasting twice a day during the month of fast before they became 15. So, they would get up in the middle of the night, they would eat with us, and they fast. And then at 12 o'clock, eat something again, and again break the fast with us, okay? But the whole idea was to help children to develop spiritual discipline. When you do that, you see the writings of the faith about obligatory prayer, about reading from the writings in the morning and the evening, about developing the virtues and those qualities. When you make these things the central issue in raising your children and what is important as far as your children, you will be surprised how the other issues become secondary. At least this was with our experience with our children, okay? And maybe of use to you, but I think this spiritual discipline is fundamental.
Basically, I just want to know how to help my peers where their families can't help them.
Well, of course, one way that you can help them is to tell them how things are in your family, how you relate to your parents, and suggest that they may want to do the same thing. But also, you can help your friends by telling them what helps you to be less nervous and less upset and less confused. One of them, of course, is because you have a good relationship with your parents. But also the other one is because probably you have a spiritual discipline. You say prayers. You look after your own spiritual well-being. And you shouldn't hesitate to tell them that. You shouldn't hesitate to say that there are certain things help me. I pray, for example. And I pray this kind of thing and read some of the prayers that you say, you see. And you would be surprised how excited the children would become, and the young people would become, and how they would easily see the value of what you do. Anyway, and when you become very good, charge them, okay? One of the people, while we were here just at the break, suggested that possibly I could talk a little bit about blended families. Blended meaning families that they have one spouse, for example, Baha'i, and one not Baha'i, and families who come from very different backgrounds and so forth, which add new dimensions of richness to the family, and also some challenges. And what I have noted usually in the blended families is that people don't take advantage of the richness of diversity that they bring to the family. They usually focus on the challenges. Of course, they have a certain degree of challenge, but also the fact that people come from different backgrounds and they have different perspectives on life. It also is a very good opportunity to learn from others and to enrich our lives. So that's one point. The other point is that I think if we take into account the two concepts that I talked yesterday and today, the concept of unity and the concept of worldview. If the couple, doesn't matter whether they are similar or not similar, whether from same backgrounds or not backgrounds, if the couple keep those two issues in the forefront of their marital relationships, how we can increase the unity of our relationship, and what do we understand from unity, and how can we create a unity-based family based on unity-based worldview rather than the authoritarian or the adversarial identity-based worldview, then I am sure that they will be surprised how the diversity of their background become secondary, and they find between themselves many points of unity and agreement. So that would be my brief comments on this issue. The more we emphasize differences, the more differences we will have. The more we focus on the fundamental law of unity and creating unity-based family, the less important become those secondary differences. With respect to the issue of faith, as long as both have a profound respect for each other's spiritual orientation and freedom within that context, then there should be no problem. But if limitations are put, then usually considerable conflict arises and considerable difficulties happens, and it's a different story altogether.
You mentioned in the identity
Based, yeah.
That's correct. The quality of competition was ranked high in there, and then in the unity-based family, there's no mention of competition at all. Is there such thing as healthy competition, or is that something we say to comfort ourselves when we're trying to achieve this unity-based identity?
Oh, that's a very important issue. We always have to compete with ourselves. Competition should take place with ourselves, which means that we should pursue excellence. As individuals, each of us should pursue excellence. Try to do our best in whatever area. As an employee, as an employer, as a husband, as a wife, as a parent, as a child, as a friend, as a member of the society, as a member of the community, always we should be in competition with ourselves, that we do our best. And when we do that, there is no need to compete with others. Because competition with others, by nature, discourages pursuit of excellence. You go so far and you say, now I'm better than everybody else. And then you stop. You don't go further. I remember Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanam one time, in one of her talks, said, one of the problems with Baha'is is that because we feel that we are an inch taller than others, therefore we should stop. While in a spiritual sense, doesn't matter how tall you get, still you can get taller. And therefore, it is essential that we always be in competition with ourselves, meaning we pursue excellence. And in the marriage, in the unity-based marriage, Abdul Baha said, if you recall in the writings, Abdul Baha said that the husband and wife should be friends with each other and help each other's spiritual development. You see? So when I am engaged in pursuit of excellence to become more and more a spiritual being, and my wife helps me in that respect and encourages me in that respect, and I do likewise, then we are competing with ourselves and we are cooperating with each other. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question on a personal level, but in society, you can't escape competition. You can't escape competition in sports, academics, work, economic market.
Sure you can. Because in the society, you cannot do better than your best, can you? Doesn't matter how much you compete, still you cannot do better than your best. Therefore, if you do your best, you are competing without competing. You following that? That's a very sensitive issue. As long as you are doing your best. You see, the negative dimension of competition is backbiting, backsliding, injuring other people, calling other people names, creating obstacle for other people. If you mean by that kind of a competition, you shouldn't do it. But if you mean that you are in a certain profession and you are going to be the best in that profession, not because you do something to others, but because you do your capacities and do the best, that's perfectly fine. And people would compete with you in that way. And the only way that they can compete then is to do their best, because you are not doing anything negative towards them. You are not using competition in that sense. So you're vying with each other in pursuit of excellence. And in the community, I know, in the society that is imbued with the spirit of competition, and a society that considers competition as a virtue, is a very difficult thing even to consider. But really, when you do your best, you are competing without competing. You're in a very special situation. And I have seen people who do that, everybody admires them. Everybody. Those who are, everybody says, well, this person is so excellent, so good, but he never does something negative towards me. And the people appreciate that kind of quality. Okay? All right.
Three things. One, I just want to, on a personal level as well as a professional level, because I'm a teacher, I just want to say thank you so much. These past 2 days have been so helpful, not only personally, but for the children that I teach. My brain's been going constantly processing in terms of the things that you said and how I can bring it forth to kids in my classroom. So thank you. Personal questions now for two. One is regarding spiritual growth. When two people get married, one person can grow spiritually faster than the other. And there's always going to be that stop and go where one grows faster than the other. And those are the challenging times where sometimes you are pulling that person along. Wondering if you have advice on how one can help the other grow that way. And the other question I had was also, oh gosh, I'm going to lose it now. It's one of those. Okay, let's stick to that question for now.
Well, yeah, quite often it happens that one partner evolves in a certain way faster than the other. And one of signs of development and maturity is the capacity to be patient and capacity to encourage. If you feel that you are getting ahead of the other and you find yourself able to be patient and encourage the other person, then you are getting ahead. If you are getting angry and mad and say, why don't you grow up? Then you better question yourself again. So it's a very interesting, because the characteristics of maturation is the ability to be patient, to understand the other person, to encourage the other person. And sometimes in some marriages, the situation wouldn't work. And the other person wouldn't be motivated, takes advantage of it, and doesn't evolve. That's a different thing. But ordinarily, this is the rule of the game.
I remember.
You remembered, but it's too late. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, as you were speaking, it came back. Respect. How does one maintain respect, again, when they're in consultation, obviously, and the consultation might get heated, where you might have an argument. Because the respect, there's a fine line, and again, being a teacher and seeing kids in the classroom, respect means very many different things to kids these days than what it might have been 10 years ago.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how we can address that respect in terms of, there's a cultural issue there for certain people. I guess in a marriage, how do you maintain that respect and any kind of communication with anybody, really, I guess? Thank you.
As a teacher, I usually tell people, my students, how I respect myself. Okay? And say, you know, the way that one, you know, I want to have a relationship with others is to make sure that they know how I find things, how I respect myself. Because when your students know that you feel respected when people don't lie to you, when people polite to you, when people listen to you, and so forth, then they know. And when they lie or don't listen or do something, they know that they are being disrespectful. And then you just say, well, I wonder what happened. Why you decided not to be respectful for me? Because you knew that what I consider being respectfulness. So again, in a marriage, in parenting, in the classroom, we have to set the parameters and make the parameters clear. And within that parameters, then people have freedom to behave however they behave, and the consequences are there accordingly. So that is essential. The couple should talk to each other and establish between each other what are the parameters of respect between them. They should know what, you know, how they think, considers, and so forth. So as long as you do that, as a parent, a teacher, a spouse, then things are much clearer. Everything has to be clear. Okay, yeah. This is the age of light. Everything has to be out in the open.
The first has to do with the law, or Allah's law of obedience to parents, and how that is affected by a person reaching the age of maturity. My own understanding, and I know this is imperfect, but if a person becomes responsible to God for their own spiritual development, would that not, basically what is the relationship between those two laws? Especially in the case in which one is really convinced that one's own decision or thoughts are more appropriate, or the suggestion being offered is unjust. So that's sort of one set of questions. The second set of questions is, in Toronto, I'm friends with a lot of some of the younger youth. And in these informal conversations, actually almost all with male youth, I know that chastity is a really major issue, specifically around pornography and masturbation. And I would like to offer these youth some concepts around how that would damage their ability to create, I don't know, create families and enter into relationships later in life, but I'm not sure of particular ideas to offer. So I was wondering if you could say that.
Okay. The first question about the obedience to parents, when you become age 15 and you are responsible before God, and God has said that one of your duties is to be obedient to your parents, then you will be obedient to your parents, okay? So that doesn't nullify that law, okay? That's number one. Number two, parents, if they are reasonable, and hopefully most of them are, realize that their relationship with a child of 4 and 8 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 45 is going to be different. If a parent relates to a child the same way, regardless of how old that child is, we are now talking about a dysfunctional situation. We are talking probably about an authoritarian setup. And that, therefore, needs intervention, needs consultation, needs assistance from some others. And as I said earlier, usually with the authoritarian individuals, the only one that they would listen to is somebody who is on a higher level of authority. And that, therefore, should be dealt with. You don't just go around and accept any nonsense because of that, but you don't also become aggressive or anything like that. But you try through process of consultation, prayer, and whatever assistance you can get to remedy the situation. Okay, that's that. The issue of chastity and you see that this is a very interesting phenomenon about sexuality, that the visualization, the idea of sex is usually greater than the very act of sexuality. In Persian language or in Arabic, they say wasful ishq, nisful ishq. Is that the discussion of love and sexuality is half of the process. And if you really reflect, we have ample evidence that individuals who try to kind of deal with their sexual urges through a detour, and detour is the pornography and masturbation and self, processes. These processes actually take away the purity of love relationship that eventually one wants to have with one's spouse. You enter in the relationship already having imagined things that are not realistic, having focused on excessive sexuality that in normal relationships do not take place. And basically what you do, you neutralize yourself towards sexual enjoyment. And there is evidence in literature that individuals who do those things, when enter actually a serious sexual relationship in marriage, soon that relationship fades away because it cannot match all of the fantasies that they have had, okay? So these individuals live in a fantasy life rather than in actual life. There is nothing, in reality, there is nothing more satisfying as the capacity for self-discipline. Self-discipline is a very satisfying, fulfilling experience. And if the individuals go on the path of self-discipline, they feel very fulfilled because, as I said, what I said yesterday, because they realize that they are in control of their sexual urges rather than their sexual urges being in control of them. Preoccupation with pornography and other activities of that nature means that their sexual interests and sexual drives are in control of the individual, okay? While in reality, sign of maturation and growth and fulfillment is when you are in control of yourself rather than those biological drives being in control of you. It's similar at one level, for example, to the whole issue of fasting. Why we fast? One of the reasons that we fast is the process of self-discipline. Of the process of realizing that we are in control of our impulses and our needs and our, in this case, hunger and thirst and so forth. It's the same dynamic applies to different urges, natural urges, which is one is sexuality, comes chastity, the other one is eating, comes fasting and moderation in fasting. Prophet Muhammad said, you know what Prophet Muhammad said about eating? He said, and God bless him, he said that. He said, don't eat unless you're hungry, and stop eating while you're still hungry. Now, if we all did that, none of us would be overweight. Just think about it. Don't eat unless you're hungry, and stop eating while you're still hungry. Okay? Keep it in mind. So I hope that this little explanation was of some help. Thank you.
A lot of problems that we cannot combine in 2 days. So, but one of those things that I wanted to recommend for the future, if we can help, for certain things I think we didn't cover, or maybe I wasn't here, but we didn't cover that some of the Baha'i family, that they are active Baha'i, and they are very participating, but they are not having really productive, too much activity. And I don't know which category it is. In the second phase, we are running away from the problem, or because it's not, as my understanding, it's not the categories of chaotic in this, or authoritarian, but maybe we can learn how we can moderate, because moderation, we say moderation, but really we don't understand what is a moderation. When we look at the Baha'i history, we see how the history, what the Baha'i sacrificed their life, they did a lot, and but we don't know their life, family life. And we read and we think we have to do, this is a service, this is a love of Baha'u'llah. If I don't do that, who is going to? And this lack become imbalance, but if we can help to the Baha'i families, that's how to balance this life and activity.
Thank you. If we look at the writings of the faith, we notice that every time that somebody asked Abdul Baha or the Guardian or the House of Justice about certain Baha'i activity like service on institutions, even pioneering and others, and the needs, fulfilling the needs of the family, always the advice was focus on the family. Family comes first. And if we keep that in mind, that whatever activities that we do, and I hope we do many, many activities, it should be as such that we do not sacrifice our well-being of our families. Because establishing a united, joyful, productive, fruitful family is one of the greatest services that we can render to the faith and to humanity.
Again, I'd like to thank you for your time. Friday night, it was very interesting because, Mr. Martin was speaking, and he, again, from sort of a governmental, political level, indicated that the equality between men and women is one of the biggest sort of hindrances to world peace. And in your session, on a sort of family level, indicated that the equality between men and women keeps the men back as well. But then, and then in the writings of Abdul Baha, I always am stunned how it's almost revolutionary, how he indicates again and again we need that equality. But on a very practical level for, say, a 12 or 13-year-old boy, to kind of speak about equality of men and women without coming across as awkward or uncomfortable, because it's exactly the polar opposite of sort of what is seen as masculine or comfortable for a young boy.
Well, I think fundamental issue about our children is to help them to realize that not everything that is in the society happening is healthy. I remember many times I had discussion with our children, and we watch TV together, and we start commenting what was healthy and wasn't healthy, what was good and what wasn't good. what was in accordance with the teachings of the faith, what wasn't in accordance with the teachings of the faith. And we didn't protect them from being involved with other kids and seeing what other kids do, but we engaged them regularly in discourse about these issues. And I think if you do that, if children, your children, 11, 12, 13, 14, begin to have discourse with you as parents, and then hopefully also discourse with other young Baha'is and their friends in the context of the community activities about these issues, they suddenly find themselves to be normal abnormals in the abnormal society, okay? In other words, I tell them, instead, the society is abnormal, and you don't want to be like the society. So you have to be different. And the whole idea of being different, unique, is so fundamental. We have to help everybody to realize that we have unique identities. We are unique human beings. We have unique chances in this life. We have unique opportunities in this life, unique talents. If you give children that sense of uniqueness, not uniqueness in the sense of arrogance, but uniqueness that in the sense of every human being is unique. So the children don't have this enormous need to be the same as everybody. They can be connected, same, and unique at the same time. This is a very difficult balance. I realize what you're saying, but at least we can pay attention to it and try to a certain degree.
If you're an adult and you experience feelings of inadequacy and lack of courage because they weren't developed in you as a child, just wondering what steps you can take to help yourself.
Well, the first thing to do to remember that you are not any longer a child. No, that's serious. That's very important. Because we usually, with individuals who are an adult and have had very bad childhood, respond to conditions of life as though still they were children, as though they didn't have capacities that has grown in the course of the years. So they underestimate their capacity. Usually, I've noticed they dramatically underestimate their capacities because they still see themselves through these parameters, this veneer of childhood and what happened to them and so forth. But sometimes the experiences of life in earlier time of life has been traumatic and has been, they have been difficult to deal with or haven't been dealt with yet. And under those conditions, it is a good idea to begin to reflect to see how those situations affect the operation of adult individual in the person. And that usually is a good idea to have a consultation, not necessarily even with a therapist or anything, with a mature other individual. You would be amazed how much consultation with a person who has overcome those kind of things or doesn't struggle with those kind of things can give you insights that can give the person insights that they can handle it. So what I'm trying to say is that we should not be devastated or should not be paralyzed by the bad experiences of earlier life. We should focus on the fact that in the course of growing up, we have developed many capacities that we don't acknowledge them and we don't appreciate them because of that earlier situation. And when we discover them, we find ourselves capable of handling them. So it sounds not that real to you, to people who have experienced that, but actually it is a real experience. Actually, you know, in my practice as a psychiatrist, that's what I did when people came to me. Basically, what I helped them, I said, look at your capacities. And when they look at their capacity, and if they cannot look at their capacities, after I get to know them, I would point out to them, they begin to develop courage to overcome that earlier impact without much difficulty. So it's much easier than most people think under those circumstances. We human beings have enormous capacity for self-healing and development. Enormous. We just have to tap it, and it comes. I'd like to thank you. You have been magnificent. I know it's not easy to sit there and, as he said, rightly, to listen to an old man like me for such a long period of time, talking and talking and talking. I was hoping that you fall asleep and then I go and sit down, but it didn't happen. I try my best next time. So many young people here, that's magnificent. That bodes well for the future. And also others who have helped and come here and encouraged all of us. So I haven't been holding these kind of seminars for many, many years. It has been a long time since I have done this because I have been busy and continue to be busy with my other activities. But I was surprised. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Yes.